In this video, I'll be taking you through how I film and photograph my work, and I'll tell you about all the equipment I use, before finishing off with a demonstration of how I edit my pictures using Photoshop and Lightroom, and finally, we'll conclude with a short Q&A of questions related to this topic. Let's begin with what keeps my camera held up, and just so you know, I'll leave links to all of the pieces of equipment I show in the description of this video. It starts with a Manfrotto tripod, a 055 to be exact. And on top of that goes this heavy duty grip ball head, which is also made by Manfrotto. This device lets me move the camera around easily. Just by squeezing the trigger, I can change the orientation in seconds, which means I'm not wasting time loosening and tightening all kinds of screws and levers and handles. Instead, I just squeeze, move, release, and that's it. I'm not sure you can buy these new anymore. They were about £200 new, but I recently picked up a second-hand one for £40, and it's in totally perfect condition. As I film in both landscape and portrait for videos posted on YouTube and Instagram, I can't tell you how useful this is to switch between the two. As for the camera itself, I'm currently using a Canon 5D Mark IV, which is an expensive piece of equipment, and by no means whatsoever is this the baseline camera you need. There are so many good brands these days, and I think a lot of it just comes down to personal preference. This films and photographs beautifully, but really that's what you should expect from any top-of-the-line camera. You can see the clay that's embedded into it. I do clean it regularly, and try to remember to always wash my hands before handling it. But inevitably the rules get broken, which tends to happen when I'm pulling handles, as one hand holds aloft a long strand of pulled clay, whilst my other hand, which was doing the pulling, grapples with the camera and tripod as I move them into position. The heavy-duty ball grip screws on tightly to the top, and with a mounting plate attached to the bottom of the camera, the whole thing slots easily into place, and it's held there securely by a locking system. The tripod also has a column that can swing down 90 degrees. This makes filming from a bird's eye view really easy, as long as you get the legs in the right place, so they aren't in the way as you're making, and so the whole contraption doesn't topple over, which has happened to me once or twice, hence the tape holding one of my lenses together, which you'll see later. And I position the strap so it won't fall down and block the view, and it's with this setup that I can get footage like this. I did try using a GoPro once to achieve a similar perspective, but I don't particularly like the quality of film they offer, as typically I tend to shoot with a relatively low f-stop, around 1.4 to 2.8, and it's this which gives me the blurry backgrounds and the sharp focal points. As for lighting, I either use natural light for everything, or if I do need some light, I'll use this simple LED panel light, which I can control the colour and brightness with. This one's a Photix, but I think this particular model is again no longer produced, but you can find numerous similar things online, and I'll link to a few options down below. Being able to control the colour is really useful in my studio. There's lots of skylights in here, and the temperature of the light can change drastically in seconds. So by keeping this on, even on a low brightness, it can keep it consistent, and it makes filming and photography possible on even really dark days. But I think the next step is to buy a diffuser for it, so the light isn't so stark, but if I want a more minimal effect, I can just point it at the wall and let all the reflected light brighten the scene or pots I'm shooting. I have two of these tripods, just in case one day one of them breaks and I need another. And my old one, which I've had since 2014, needs to have its quick release clips tightened occasionally, otherwise they can get loose and slip, but it's easy to correct, and the tripod comes with a special tool to fix it. For my product photography, I shoot on the simplest of backdrops. These are just two bits of white wood, which I prop up like so to photograph on, and I prefer using this as compared to a curved backdrop, as I like my pots to occupy a space, and if shot on a curved, smooth white backdrop, they can look almost like they're floating, and are lost slightly, but sometimes it's needed, and it is of course quite subjective too. As for the lenses I use, for my product photography I typically use this, which is a 100mm macro lens. It's a prime lens and has a 2.8 f-stop, which could be improved. I've always preferred using prime lenses. These are ones that don't zoom in or out, and typically, as they're a bit more simple, they tend to provide a better quality image. The other lens I use is this Sigma 50mm 1.4 art lens, which gives me a wider shot, and it's what I film most of my videos with. The footage it shoots is wonderfully crisp, and yes, its chassis is held together with tape after it fell almost 6 foot, and somehow the only thing that happened to it as the metal case became a bit loose. There are plenty of other options, and purchasing a specific camera or lens isn't going to suddenly fix your photography. Just like any other skill, it's practice, trial and error that really help you learn and improve. And gradually you do train your eye to see better images, I think. As if you compare what I shoot these days, compared to what I was creating in 2014, you'd be shocked. And my equipment hasn't changed all that much. As with my previous camera and lenses, which were cheaper, I can still create the same level of professionalism with those than I can with these. But a camera like this is always going to be superior to what your phone can produce. If you have very glossy pots, you can breathe some warm air onto them to cloud over the glossy surface, so there are less reflections for the moment you take your picture. This is the view my 50mm lens creates. And now I'll switch to the 100mm, which is more or less the same. I like to use higher focal length lenses to photograph my pots, as there's less distortion that's created by the wide angle effect lenses with lower focal ranges will give you. If you're using a lower focal range, your pots can end up looking distorted and they might not really resemble what they look like in real life. So for product photography, I recommend using a 50mm and above. And it might feel a bit intimidating moving to a camera like this from your phone, but the difference between them is profound, and the quality of your images can go a long way in making your work feel more professional. And with how easy it is to promote yourself online these days and sell work through your own website, learning to use a camera means you aren't constantly having to hire somebody or seek help for your photography, although it's still a lovely thing to do on occasion, as seeing somebody else's eye capture your work and your studio can paint it in a whole new light. Now let's move on to how I edit my photos. My backdrop isn't huge, so occasionally when I'm taking pictures and I want a more expansive white backdrop, I'll extend what I've got in Photoshop. There are 3 ways I do this, depending on the image of course. The first being with the newly released generative fill, which is so easy to use. I just select the areas I want to be replaced, leave the prompt blank, and then click generate, and 9 times out of 10, with a simple image like this, the AI gets it more or less right, and if it can't quite get there, I just use the clone stamp tool to smooth over the areas it had trouble with. With this tool, you sample an area and then paste that anywhere where the circle is. It can be tricky to use, but with some practice it becomes extraordinarily powerful, and sometimes it's simply quicker just to begin with this tool for an image like this, which I'll show you in a moment. With the background fixed, I'll then brighten the image using a combination of curves and levels until it feels properly lit, as if shot in a studio environment, and at the end I normally just sharpen things a little bit. That's how I fix it with generative fill. The only problem with this method is that the area that's generated tends to be quite low quality. So if I want a higher quality fill, I'll sometimes use the content aware fill, but as you can see it still leaves some weird artifacts on the left and right, which I need to tidy up manually. So I deselect these areas and merge it with my main image, and then once again I use the clone stamp tool to fix these parts. The final method is just to use the clone stamp tool from the beginning, and ultimately what you'll figure out is that different images require a different approach. But by doing this, you can create images that look as if you have a beautiful, sweeping backdrop, when in fact it's just 2 simple, white panels in a smallish, dusty pottery. And here's a simple before and after to show you the difference it makes. It isn't always the sides of the image that need fixing too. It can be the bottom, like this, which I fix in exactly the same way. When I'm editing photographs for a shop update, I begin by using Photoshop to do all of the corrections you've just seen me do, but I photograph in such a way so only a handful of images need this. Otherwise it can eat up hours of your time. I then load all the images into Lightroom, and it's here I fix brightness, exposure and colour. I zoom out like this and look for outliers, like these mugs with a slightly darker background. I then adjust the exposure or any other of the settings as needed to brighten the picture up, but without making it look unrealistic. If I've been photographing on a particularly dark day, I'll make a preset in Lightroom which I can apply to all the photographs. Like this picture, it was a cloudy, dark day when I took this, and one of my presets just brightens everything up so it resembles the rest of the images in this collection. The preset doesn't always get it bang on though, so often once it's been applied, I'll do some manual adjustments, and then I can save that as a new preset which should work properly for the rest of the group. I also make sure the pot in the image is straight, and this is perhaps my biggest gripe with pictures of pots online. This picture was slightly skewed to the right, so as I'm editing for my shop update, I go through every picture, and if I notice that it's leaning one way or the other, I'll make this quick adjustment. This also extends into my Instagram and the footage I film for these YouTube videos. It's a small detail perhaps, but one I think makes all the difference. I'll now quickly take you through the editing procedure For a recent Instagram post, I begin by masking over the area I want to correct with content-aware fill. I then deselect the selection and merge it with my main image, and then I increase the brightness. Sometimes, if the light is a bit blue in my studio, I'll remove that colour altogether from the background, as long as it doesn't change the colour of the pots too much. You shouldn't be able to notice the difference in the ceramic pieces, but you can certainly see it in the background. And that's it, a finished picture ready to post. And with all my product photography, once I've done that to every single picture, it can all be uploaded onto my shop, ready for one of my restocks. Just like anything else, the more you do this, the faster you get. This is something I do practically every day in some way, shape or form. But just like learning how to take photographs yourself, learning how to edit like this has become an increasingly useful skill as the world moves ever more online. Let's move on to the Q&A. These are questions I asked on Instagram, which is my go-to platform for things like this, if you don't already follow me there. A number of you wanted to know how I incorporate filming into my routine and if it slows me down or interrupts my making. The short answer is of course it does, but having equipment that's quick and easy to move around really makes a big difference. So setting up my camera and clicking film only takes a matter of seconds, but it's the constant changing of angles that eats up time, as I have to wash my hands, dry them, and then move the camera. If I'm production throwing, I'll film the same bowl being made from various angles, and then I can splice all that footage together, making it appear seamless. And often I'll spend the morning filming before spending the rest of the day making like normal, and filming only a number of additional shots. The truth is though, it is very disruptive, but as a tool of advertising my work and getting my name out there, nothing else compares. So it's worth the trade in my opinion, especially since starting YouTube, as at least they pay content creators fairly for the time they put in, unlike other platforms. Which I suppose leads nicely into this question. What's the breakdown of income generated from social media versus pot sales? These days, and it's taken time to ramp up to this point, my YouTube alone generates roughly £40,000 to £50,000 a year, which might sound like a lot, but the sheer amount of hours that go into creating these justifies it completely, as this is basically a second job I do on top of making pots. People liken it to passive income, and it is, I suppose. A video I create will keep earning me money for years in some cases, especially the more tutorial-led ones. So it has alleviated a little bit the pressure of making and selling pots, but that still probably accounts for about 2/3 of my income, depending on the year and what I've been doing. And the book that I've been writing really did throw a spanner in the works, as I simply had no time to make actual pots. Thomas asks, what do you do to preserve continuity? Well, the truth would be that I break this all the time, if you really look, especially in the clothes I'm wearing and the tools used. They do change position a lot, but if I'm filming something like throwing a mug or a bowl, which I make many dozens of, it's really easy to splice all that footage together, as the throwing of each pot remains the same, so I can just change the camera angle numerous times, film the entire process of each bowl, and then edit all of that into a more continuous process. Dyra Studio asks, do you do this all alone or do you have a team? This is another quick and easy one to answer, as it's just me making all the pots, making all the videos, taking photographs, and doing all the editing. It's a lot at times, and one day I'd love to have an intern or an apprentice, but I don't think I'm quite ready yet. Yahia asks, how much do you film versus what you publish? In some cases, especially for the landscape videos for YouTube, I'm probably only publishing about 10% of what I film. There's so much baggage on each clip that I end up cutting quite a lot away, as otherwise most of my YouTube videos would be hours long, and I simply wouldn't have enough time to narrate over them. I also want my videos to be relatively short and snappy, to hold the viewer's attention, so I try to edit accordingly, whilst also showing off the process as best I can. Rebecca asks, how do you store all your video files? So I can't bring myself to delete any of the raw footage I've filmed, which means storing it gets quite expensive, as I keep having to purchase new 8TB hard drives. Each one contains numerous folders of landscape and portrait footage, and this is just one of many folders of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of clips. I generally just look at the thumbnails to find the clips I'm after, and I've made a document of sorts that tells me roughly where the important bits are, but it's still all a bit of a maze to navigate, and woe betide anybody else who tries to make sense of it. Dylan asks how I taught myself to take photos. I'm entirely self-taught when it comes to photography and filming. It's all just a big mixture of trial and error and watching endless YouTube videos to answer many of the questions I have. And just like making pottery, and like I've mentioned a few times in this video now, my pictures at the beginning were atrocious compared to those I take now. For a long time I struggled to make the videos as high quality as the images I take, in terms of the framing and composition and so on, although they're pretty much level now, I think. Lots of you also asked to see how I edit together my reels, or shorts as they're called here on YouTube. So here's the timeline of one of my videos. And yes, believe it or not, I still use iMovie to make my videos. They're such inherently simple things, and I can use iMovie pretty effectively to make what I want. As for the sequence of footage, well, of course it's just edited to my liking. It's quick and snappy, and I try not to linger on any one scene for too long, unless it's incredibly satisfying to watch or is very interesting. This video shows me using Valve lapping paste to make a lid fit more smoothly into the jar beneath, which means it's a video with a lot of evocative sound. At least my previous 2 videos like this have really riled up people in the comments, so I lean into that. And you can see how I manipulate the footage in the green boxes underneath the blue, which is the footage. I'll sometimes increase the volume of some sounds while decreasing others, and I often overlap sounds so that the sound begins before the clip actually begins. This way the sounds in my videos aren't so jarring, and they flow into each other from clip to clip, which I think makes listening back to the videos a more enjoyable experience, as there's no harsh noises that suddenly catch you out. So I begin by editing all the footage into the sequence I want, then I adjust all the audio, and finally I do all the colour correction, which iMovie isn't great at, but as long as my initial footage isn't too dark, it's fine. If I feel the video needs it, I'll select all the footage and I'll add a hum reduction to it. This makes the sound pop just that bit more, especially if there's quite a bit of background noise. A short video like this will probably take me about 10 to 15 minutes to edit, and I try to spend about 20 or 30 minutes a day in the studio filming footage specifically for these shorts, as at the moment, and for a long time really, they've been the most powerful pieces of content to build audiences online. Anyway, I've probably forgotten to speak about something important I wanted to mention, but I'll leave this video as is. And if you have any more questions about this topic, do leave a comment, and maybe I'll make a part 2. I'll try and include as many useful links in the description below to the various pieces of equipment I use. I hope you found this video useful, and thanks so much for taking your time to watch. And as always, I'll see you next week.